Hello everybody, so this is a live that is happening on both my Instagram account, Tariana Rocha, you write it all together, and that's for my Instagram account, and it's also happening in the free and empowered secret it's not secret anymore, I forget what it's called, but a Facebook group that is not open to the public. So if you want to participate in lives like this, then you can come to my Instagram account or you can go to the Facebook group. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about the characteristics of the covert pathological narcissist. And just a couple of pieces of information before we get started. The first one is the Inner Mastery Lab card will remain open until the 30th and not the 23rd. This will give us an extra week to create educational materials that I wanted to get around to creating, but due to another launch and also the fact that I got sick this week, I wasn't able to focus on that as much as I wanted. So if you want information in participating in this 10-week online program, then you can click in my the link in my biography here on my Instagram account, or you can go to the free and empowered group and click on the description of this video. Or if you're on YouTube, you can just look at the description of this video and you will find a link to the Inner Mastery Lab. All right, so let's get started about the covert narcissist. Now, first and foremost, the purpose of this video is to educate and not to diagnose. I am not a psychologist, I am a psychoanalyst, and I am also the daughter of a mother that had very strong covert pathological narcissistic traits. And I have developed an autobiographical work program that is based on my personal experience, on emerging from that experience, and also my studies. And I'm always studying, so the videos are going to get better and better because we have to always study. And the purpose of this video is to raise awareness about maybe things that you went through that aren't very clear to you. And because of this lack of clarity, you find yourself kind of stuck and not being able to make important decisions with regards to your mental health, with regards to whether you should or shouldn't maintain certain relationships, be it with your mother, your father, your husband, or whoever you might suspect the covert narcissist is. And if you suspect that you might have covert narcissistic traits, then I hope to inspire some insight so that you may also find ways of lessening these traits, because when it's not a full-blown personality disorder, you can go up the spectrum or down the spectrum based on a few little things that we're going to mention here. And so I hope to be able to increase your insight for your healing process as well. All right, so first of all, we're talking about something that, according to the DSM, is a personality disorder. So like I said, the point here isn't diagnosing. So what I'm really interested in doing is looking at narcissism as it shows up on a spectrum. Before we get started on the pathological aspects of narcissism, let's take a look at what a personality is. So personality is a set of characteristics, cognitions, behaviors, and even emotions that define the way that you interact with yourself, with other people, and with life. Now, when we start calling it a personality disorder, or even if you don't want to say personality disorder, but when we see that certain characteristics become toxic, are when the way that the person's identity, self-image is formed, and the way that they regulate their identity and their emotions actually generates a very negative experience of life, or very negative emotional states inside of them. Or it also generates a lot of conflict in relationships, and some of these people might not be able to hold down a job because of these characteristics that generate so much conflict, so many problems. So when we're dealing with people that have particularly cluster B personality disorders, we're dealing with people who are, by definition, kind of vampirical. So just by being next to them, you feel that you have to give so much of yourself and you have to establish so many boundaries. And that's when we see that we're getting into the personality disorder category. So there might be, is it genetic? Is it learned? Well, I guess different professionals would have different views on this. But what I can tell you is, of course, it seems that certain aspects might be genetic, like would a narcissist manifest as an extroverted narcissist or an introverted narcissist? It would seem the introversion or extroversion is more genetic than anything else. But when it comes to the pathological expression of needing to feel special to the point of creating a fantasy grandiose identity that you need other people to validate for you, and when it gets to the point that other people's autonomy bothers you, right? And you seek to destroy that autonomy in order not to feel bad about yourself, then we're talking about traits that, according to what we've seen in the research, these are traits that are learned. Okay, and they have got to do with attachment trauma that creates an unstable or unfavorable sense of self. Or so it could be called disorder of the self as well, right? So this could happen to anybody, right? Anybody can be a covert narcissist. Your mother could be one, your father could be one, your brother could be one, you could be one, right? It's not just a thing. Since we talk a lot about pathological narcissistic mothers here, it's important to say that really anyone can be a covert narcissist or have these characteristics. Now, in order for us to understand how this type of narcissism is formed, first I want to kind of express what a healthy upbringing would look like, what somewhat good enough parenting, according to Donald Winnicott, would look like, and what type of expression of one's personality, of even healthy narcissistic traits that a good enough upbringing or good enough parenting would result in. And then I want to compare that to what happens to people that end up developing pathological narcissistic traits. So, there's a lot of pressure, I believe, on parents to give kids the best and to do all sorts of things and jump through all sorts of hoops in order to be the best parents. And I'm not a mother, but I can see in the mothers and fathers around me how much pressure there is in terms of everybody having an opinion. So here, what I'm going to really be using as a benchmark for good parenting is just Donald Winnicott, and it's his model of good enough parenting. And this by no means means that I'm trying to parent bash or any of that. It's just a matter of cause and consequence. So what is the good when certain things are present in terms of parenting? They have certain consequences. So good enough parenting basically consists of, one, seeing the child as their own person. So we see that people who have pathological narcissism don't see other people as their own people. They see them as extension of themselves and only see them for what they can derive from them, right? The good enough parent understands that really they're like a guardian of that little soul that comes to planet Earth, and their job is to create ideal conditions for that unique individual identity to kind of flourish and manifest itself. Now, good enough parenting also involves understanding that children will not be perfect, so not demanding that they follow such strict rules that aren't even coherent with their developmental stage. So, children are going to be rowdy, they're going to break things, they're going to lie from time to time, they're going to make mistakes. And the good enough parent meets the child where they're at and doesn't expect behavior from them that doesn't make sense according to their age, according to their cognitive development, right? Good enough parenting has got to do with providing the basic needs of the child. And now we're not talking about just food. We know, for example, that children need touch, they need affection, they need eye contact. This is so true that we can go as far as saying that the brain is a social organ. Babies who receive, they receive food and they get taken care of in terms of hygiene. But when they don't get affection, when they're not looked into, right? And when somebody doesn't look into their little eyes and sees the little individual that exists inside of them, when there's no affection, babies' brains will actually not develop normally. And particularly in the areas of processing emotions and also social skills, and God knows what other areas, they will actually have deficits. And this will influence how safe they feel in their own skin, how safe they feel in life. So I'm also talking about existential needs, such as the need for affection, the need for having someone mirror back to you your emotional state so you can make sense of them, right? If we don't have someone to mirror back our emotional states because we're met with indifference or with judgment or hostility, we don't understand ourselves as individuals. Babies depend on people around them to make sense of their inner world. So good enough parenting involves providing for the basic physiological needs, but also for these existential, emotional, and psychological needs. Good enough parenting allows the child to take responsibility, age-appropriate responsibility, right? And deal with consequences for their actions. So overprotective parents, for example, or even overprotective parents with narcissistic traits that use their overprotection to try to come across as really great parents, but what they're doing is infantilizing their children so they never grow up and become self-sufficient. This is a form of abuse. It's a form of neglect because children need to, take on more and more responsibility as is age appropriate. And if we don't allow them to do so, we're creating a sort of dependency that might be convenient for us, right? If we need something from them, like attention or validation or a sense of identity, at least I'm a mom, I might not feel like I'm anything else, but this kid, so long as it's under my wing, validates that I'm a mom, right? So the good enough parent lets the kid take responsibility for their actions in an age-appropriate way. And also the good enough parent recognizes that it takes a village to raise a child. So if you think that you're the only person who's going to influence how your child develops, right? And the beliefs and the things that happen to your child, this is kind of an unrealistic expectation, because the truth is your child is going to be influenced. Your child's personality development is going to be influenced by dad, by sister and brothers, by kids at school a great deal, by other authority figures or other adults, by teachers, right, by coaches. So the good enough parent recognizes that they are not the center of their kid's life. Okie dokie. So having explained what good enough parenting looks like, what does it result in, and how can we kind of associate all of this information to the covert narcissist? Well, good enough parents allow kids to securely attach to them. What this means is basically as the baby and the kid expresses itself, because someone is there to mirror them, right? In mirroring here just means that you are able to put aside your needs for that moment and really hold space for that child's emotional reaction. This doesn't mean there's no consequences for things, but you try to step into the child's perception of reality and see things from their mindset. When you can validate their mindset and kind of be a witness to their reality, understand why they feel pain, understand why they're trying to draw attention to themselves, why they're acting out, you are creating a safe space for the child to be able to accept those bits and pieces of his or her own expression. And what this creates inside the child is a sense of safety. Like, no matter what comes out of me, mom or dad is always a safe port. They're always like a haven for me. And once I feel securely attached with these people who receive my personal expression in a non-judgmental, non-invasive, loving, nurturing, and responsive way, I feel so safe with them that it gives me confidence to go out into the world and have relationships, right? And believe in myself and in my dreams and invest in myself. And you know what? Because my parents were able to mirror my emotions even when they were heavy, and they didn't make me feel crappy about having heavy emotions, even though I can believe in myself and invest in big dreams, if I fail, I don't feel that this is such a big deal, because in my experience as a child, I didn't lose anybody's love, approval, or attention just because I wasn't perfect, right? So we can see how good enough parenting fosters what is called healthy narcissism. And this is where narcissism shows up in the middle of the spectrum. Let's say that narcissism goes from 1 to 10 when we're talking about the traits. And healthy narcissism would show up at number 4, 5, and 6, where children essentially learned that they were really important for their parents, they were loved, they were worthy of love, and because they have a safe home that they can go back to, they can go out into the world and take risks and deal with failure, right? So this is healthy narcissism. Okie dokie. Having said all of that, so what makes a narcissist, a pathological narcissist, and what makes a covert narcissist? And what is a covert narcissist when compared, for example, to a grandiose or extroverted narcissist? Well, what makes a narcissist are other narcissists. So let's say that you are raised by someone who has pathological narcissistic traits. This means they don't see you as an individual, and they are only interested in the narcissistic supply that you can provide to them: attention, validation, applause, money, sex, power, status. All of these things are different forms of narcissistic supply. If your mom is like this, or if your dad is like this, what you notice, because the brain is a social organ, and because we are literally dependent on receiving affection in order to feel like we're even worthy of love, if you notice that some of your behavior is met with indifference, with judgment, with hostility, or with punishment, whatever, children will quite naturally disown parts of themselves, exactly the parts of themselves that were rejected by their parents. And their spontaneity, that when received, right, would allow kids to get to know different parts of themselves and get to know themselves and their preferences and their needs and their desires, right? This gets stifled. And so they don't have access to all of these parts of themselves. And instead, they start to magnify those characteristics that were validated or seen by their parents. Essentially, the child who was never seen and appreciated for being themselves, but rather they were either always put down, or when they were appreciated, it was solely for when they were making the parent look good, or for when they were providing some sort of something useful for the parent, right? Because narcissistic parents use their children, even if it's for like psychological help, meaning there's the role reversal, right, where the kids become the parents and they take care of mom emotionally or dad emotionally. In all of these cases, if you're just validating the child because, you know, she wins beauty contests, or because she draws attention to herself, or because she can listen to your really sad stories for hours on end and years on end, and you feel validated as the biggest victim, and your entire identity is invested in this, these people learn that as themselves, they either don't exist, they're not important, or they're worthless. And what this creates is a split in the narcissistic personality, where they have the experience of worthlessness every time that they're trying to be spontaneous and their parents are not having it, their narcissistic parents are not having it. And then the other part of the split are the tiny little bits of that personality of that kid that do get validated. So what this creates as an emotional experience is that in the same person, and there's going to be different levels of awareness about this, and this is where the covert narcissism comes in. The person will experience that, you know, extreme shame and worthlessness, and like they're not lovable, and they're not important, and they're just the worst piece of crap ever. And as a response to that, they will really invest in the little bits and pieces of their personality that were validated, and then they will really develop and magnify either the intellectual skills or the beauty or whatever it is that got them that got them attention from their parents. Now, where the covert narcissist comes in in comparison to the grandiose narcissism is that some people are naturally introverted, right? Like I said, there's some research that indicates that this is more genetic, the only characteristic that kind of would be actually genetic. And some people are just naturally extroverted. So some people, when they don't feel safe or accepted in the outside world, they will naturally withdraw. And some people are naturally more prone to approach people and initiate relationships. So when we're talking about covert narcissism, it's really important to understand that the core wound is the same. It's the split in the sense of the self that is based on all of the disowned, shameful parts, and the tiny little parts that are are validated, that are magnified, and that that personality clings to in order to compensate for the anxiety generated by all of this shame, right? And covert narcissism is just a way that that wound expresses itself. Because covert narcissists, they don't have the personality structure of someone who is naturally extroverted to deal with their sense of shame in an extroverted way. So it does not mean that these people are actively sneaky, even though we all know there's pathological pathological lying involved in any type of pathological narcissism. There is obviously a lot of manipulation, right? But it doesn't mean that covert narcissists are like actively planning things that are abusive. It's just that the way that they express their narcissism is oftentimes harder to detect because they don't come across as bullies necessarily. As a matter of fact, they might come across as quite humble, quite meek, quite shy. And so I'm going to briefly compare a few of the traits between the covert narcissist and the grandiose narcissist so that we may kind of differentiate between the two. And then I'm going to kind of delve deep into the key characteristics of the covert narcissist that really not only mark his or her personality and self-image, but also the way that they relate to the world. So, okay, the first difference between the grandiose or extroverted narcissist and the covert / shy / vulnerable / introverted narcissist, because these are all the same thing, is that the grandiose narcissist is motivated by reward, and the covert narcissist is motivated by punishment. Now, why is this so? Well, this is a result of their sets of belief and their emotional experience of themselves and of life. For example, the grandiose narcissist is actually quite competitive. He likes hierarchies. He's always aiming to be at the top. It doesn't matter what it costs, depending on the level of the narcissism, the pathological narcissistic traits. They believe that they deserve a place at the top, that they're better and more entitled to certain things, which makes them lack empathy. And their grandiosity is oftentimes, in our societal structure, in our culture, is oftentimes applauded, right? You gotta be a go-getter, you gotta go for the top, you gotta be number one, you gotta think about yourself. So oftentimes their behavior is applauded. They are people who, because they have, excuse me, because they experience less negative affects than the covert narcissist, they do have energy. So they achieve things, they reach goals, and they are applauded for this, right? Now, the belief set of a covert narcissist are quite different. So their grandiosity, when we're talking about a shy narcissist, their grandiosity isn't based on what they've actually achieved and what they've received applause for. It's actually based on potential. You will find that the covert narcissist believes themselves to be unique and special. However, they feel that they are unfairly treated by a society that is too dumb and too inferior to recognize how special they are. So their grandiosity is based on what could have been. Like it's that boxer, the athlete that gave up boxing and is really frustrated about the fact that he didn't achieve certain things in his career, but now he's like judging people on TV like, oh, he's a crappy boxer. I would be so much better than him if I had continued, training. If the government in my country supported athletes, if life had been like this, if life had been like that. So they will minimize other people's achievements in order to kind of bolster this idea that they are really, the best. And what a shame that life is against them, people are against them, situations are against them, and they weren't able to manifest their grandiosity, right? Now, because their identity is based on what could have been, they reach a certain point in their life where, you know, they have these characteristics where they don't take responsibility for anything because that would involve recognizing that they make mistakes and that they're wrong somehow. And as we know, pathological narcissists will not do this because they are invested in maintaining a grandiose self-image. And in order to do this, they have to make other people be wrong in order for them to be right. So the covert narcissist will at one point kind of be at a fork in the road where he will or she will understand that, you know, they haven't achieved the things that they've achieved because they don't take responsibility for themselves. And this is really painful, particularly if you've been kind of having this identity socially for many decades and people see you as someone that could have been great. You know, how are you going to all of a sudden be like, well, you know, the truth is I feel like a loser because I gave up on all of my great projects because I have low self-esteem. So they will feel pressured to kind of, you know, increase their pathological narcissism. And pathological narcissism can go up or down the spectrum, particularly after traumatic life events. But at one point, the covert narcissist will be pressured to either take responsibility for their life as it is, or to really invest in the I am the biggest victim and my pain is the greatest and the most unique. And once they kind of make the transition to that higher level of pathological narcissism, where their entire identity is based on I could have been great, but life is just too stupid to allow me to show my greatness. And this is why my pain is so unique. Once they get invested in that personality, then really they've lost touch with their ability to get in touch with their shame, and therefore to take responsibility for their actions and for change. At that point, we're talking about something that is already kind of beyond the point where the person still has insight and is capable of change. Now, this investment in the idea that I could have been great, but you know, the world is just run by imbeciles, and therefore my grandiosity is not recognized. This is going to cause a bunch of toxic patterns in their relationships. And so let's keep going. And let's take a look at how these patterns emerge. So another difference between the grandiose narcissist and the covert narcissist is that since the covert narcissist does have access to their shame, they do feel worthless. They swing from feeling absolutely worthless to being like, oh, I could have been great. The grandiose narcissist has lost touch with that. He has dissociated from the parts of him that are still capable of feeling that shame. And he is more driven, more self-assured, more extroverted, competitive. He has the personality structure and the energy to, when met with criticism, either explode in anger, because that's normal for all narcissists, to use anger, right, against criticism, but he's able to convince himself that other people are just imbeciles. He has enough inner strength for that in the way that he sees himself. The covert narcissist does not have this inner strength. He is profoundly insecure in a way that he perceives. And he's at war with himself because the fact that he's actually has self-defeating behavior because he feels inferior and like an outcast and like he is suppressed by the dominant group and like he isn't validated. He feels so crappy about himself. So crappy about himself that this creates a gap between what he achieves and the actual goals that he reaches and his grandiose self-image. And this is painful for him, right? And so, whereas the extroverted narcissist is very goal-oriented and he will go for the top, the covert narcissist is not going to look for leadership positions. What they're going to look for instead are opportunities where no one is looking. And in those opportunities, because they do suffer from social anxiety because they feel like aliens and like they are alienated, because they feel inferior, right, and disconnected from humanity. And they do suffer social anxiety, and therefore they don't want to be at the leadership position where everyone's looking at them and where they can make mistakes and suffer humiliation. What they're going to look for are opportunities where they can unleash their wrath without being punished or without being seen. So they're going to look for middle management jobs, bureaucratic positions, or any sort of job, like being a police officer, for example, where someone is going to authorize that you can exact punishment. And you can do it really without having to deal with the consequences of being, for example, an open bully, like many extroverted, grandiose narcissists are. Another thing, because the covert narcissist feels their shame and feels their insecurity, even though they try to kind of defend against it, they end up not being able to actually reach many goals. And there are people who you will notice that they have many different interests. Like one week they want to be an astrologist, the next week they want to be a psychologist, the next week they want to be an athlete. And they'll have all these goals, but because of their underlying insecurity, they basically will shy away from completing those goals, and they will leave many projects unfinished because they have a mentality that, what if I try and I fail, and then I met with my own shame and I met with my inadequacy? So you know what? I'm just not going to try. And as they age, they will have this history, this background of not having achieved stuff. And this creates an even greater gap in the way that they actually have been able to live their lives and how they wish to see themselves in terms of the grandiosity. So the emotional states that a covert narcissist will feel a lot are actually quite negative because he's very neurotic. So when we say neurotic, we're talking about people who experience negative emotional states. And the covert narcissist does experience more negative emotional states because he can access his shame and his insecurity than the grandiose narcissist. The grandiose narcissist is oftentimes oblivious to things that are going on in his subconscious mind that have got to do with the shame, right? Not the covert narcissist. Being neurotic, he has cup half empty sort of mentality about life. He feels a lot of shame, a lot of disgust, a lot of anxiety, a lot of hatred, and a lot of envy. Of course, the grandiose narcissist does feel envy as well. But what I want to really drill home here is that the covert narcissist's entire identity and the way that they interact with other people is based on envy. And this is why they are so toxic. They're as toxic as grandiose narcissists. But because they're harder to identify, and because they have covert ways of abusing people, this is really, really, really dangerous. So basically, let's talk about anger, and we're gonna get into envy and how this affects how covert narcissists interact with other people. So the grandiose narcissist, when dealing with anger, he doesn't really, because he doesn't suffer from social anxiety, and he believes he's the best anyway, he might just explode, throw a tantrum, doesn't care about rules. He doesn't care if he's in public. He might want to dominate the environment with his anger. The covert narcissist will probably not do this. Depending on the level of narcissism, if they just have traits, if they feel anger at that first moment, they might just kind of withdraw. And you will just kind of see that there's that seething anger, or they're kind of aloof, or you can't access them. And then the covert, the passive aggressive stuff starts showing up, because they have to find a way of dealing with that resentment, that anger that is such an integral part of their inner lives. They will follow rules, essentially, if they're being watched. If they're not being watched, like I said, they will look for opportunities to feel powerful, right? So they'll follow rules, but they'll feel resentment for following those rules. The covert narcissist, when met with anger, they will focus obsessively on the people or the situation that triggered this anger in them. It's really weird to observe. You can see how someone just starts kind of derailing, how their mental state just starts going down the drain when they feel, for example, publicly humiliated, and this is their narcissistic injury that stimulates the narcissistic rage. They will go off into this obsessive focus on that person, that bitch, that asshole that caused this in them. or on that situation. They're going to really capitalize on the situation that exposed them to narcissistic injury. And this is when they can, you know, start making their backhand compliments that aren't actually compliments at all. They're a way of indirectly trying to minimize what you've achieved. This was where the covert aggression shows up. The passive aggressiveness, someone said that here. The silent treatment, they will withdraw their love, right? And they will oscillate between the self-loathing and the hatred of others. So they're met with anger, and this is their narcissistic injury where they feel their inferiority, and they'll just oscillate between I'm worthless, oh my God, I am so worthless, I have to make someone else feel worthless. And this is an essential key ingredient of pathological narcissism, because there is no mature emotional regulation involved there. Pathological narcissists, they will kind of outsource the management of their emotions by forcing other people to feel what they are feeling. They don't know how to deal with their emotions, and they depend on people for being punching bags and for absorbing the shock of their wrath, of their self-hatred. And so how we see this manifest with the covert narcissist is that if he is kind of going up the spectrum of pathological narcissism, instead of just withdrawing when he or she's in touch with their shame, what they're going to do is they're going to create relationships with people that they can scapegoat and that they can play the blame game with. And then really at this point, like I said, they're oftentimes far beyond the point where they can be helped, because at this point they're so invested in making other people wrong so that they can defend against the fact that they feel inferior, that they will have a partner or children who are specifically chosen to be a scapegoat and who are used specifically as a punching bag for emotional regulation. And then when we go into more extreme forms of covert narcissism, when reacting to anger, and we get to really extreme cases like, you know, those social recluses who kind of withdraw from reality and from society, and then they start kind of, you know, going crazy with their paranoid fantasies, and they're planning like a mass shooting, and they go off to plan their mass shooting because they really believe that, you know, they are grandiose, and then they might do something to finally get that final recognition that the world didn't want to give them. So we're talking obviously about a very extreme case here, but this is just so you guys can understand how as it happens on the spectrum. We can just have the withdrawal and the passive aggressiveness. We can have the active scapegoating and the blame game, or we can actually have I need to destroy the enemy, and I'm going to seek revenge. And at that final moment, then I might seek recognition, because as a covert narcissist, I'm socially shy and I don't feel comfortable, you know, being in the limelight. Now, because of this oscillation between self-loathing and hating other people, this really covert narcissists, they feel chronic envy all the time. They're so angry of other people's looks, power, relationship, achievements. They're so angry that they will actually actively try to destroy people, or to make people who have something that they don't have feel like they are less. And if you are the daughter or the son of a covert narcissist, then you have certainly felt this envy and all of the types of attack against your autonomy, your beauty, your light, because this is an integral part of how the personality is built. And this creates a situation in which covert narcissists clearly love to see people suffer. When you're down and out, that might be the moment where your mom is the happiest, or when your covert narcissistic dad is the happiest. Because since they feel inferior all the time, if they see you being inferior for at least a moment, it relieves them of that horrible anxiety that comes from the sensation of being inferior. And it allows them to make downward social comparisons. So generally, covert narcissists are making upward social comparisons where they're like, damn it, he's better than me. God, she's got more beauty than me. He's richer than me. She's more this than me, right? They don't tell you this because they're perfect, obviously, but this is going on internally at some level. And when they see someone in pain, oh, they feel such relief because they can finally feel superior to someone and make downward social comparisons. And you can also observe that oftentimes covert narcissists will want to increase your pain in a number of different ways. So for example, a covert narcissist might actually create a situation where you fail, such as, for example, I have a friend that has a mother with covert narcissistic traits, and every time he tried to learn how to cook, she'd be like, you're dumb, you're not going to be able to do that, get out of the kitchen, you know, and she would take the pan away, and she wouldn't let him learn how to cook. And so, you know, when he finally tried to learn how to cook, obviously he burned something or it didn't come out perfectly, and then she was like, see, you're not capable of this, let me just do that. So you create a situation where the other person is going to fail, and then you feel that you can interact with them, your ego is safe with them. You might also create situations where you can derive pleasure out of from people's pain by asking them lots of questions about their problems and making comments about, oh God, yeah, that's horrible. Wow. Yeah, that I gotta say, that's a horrible situation. Well, I guess you're screwed, right? Kind of, you actually feel worse after talking to them, because you can feel energetically that was a kind of a vampirical encounter, right? You share your problems and they seem to be empathetic, but they're actually kind of using that against you. They're probing your life in order to amplify any sort of sadness or negativity that you're going through, so that they can derive happiness from your misfortune, so that they can regulate their crushing sense of inferiority and envy. Okie dokie, guys. So these are the key characteristics of the covert narcissist. And depending on where the covert narcissist you're dealing with is on the spectrum, if we're already going into the scapegoating kind of territory, and when they're invested in the whole, I am the biggest victim and I'm so special, you don't understand my pain is greater than Holocaust survivors' pain, my pain is greater than everybody's pain, right? People at this level, they are probably beyond anything that you can do. And you have to understand when dealing with this person that because envy is an integral part of their personality, they will stifle your expansion, your mental health, your brilliance, your beauty. And if this person is your mother or your father, you must understand that this is intrinsically unhealthy for your development, for you being connected with your true self, because this is a true threat for them. So adjust your expectations. Don't think that just because you explain things to this person that all of a sudden that crushing sense of inner shame and inadequacy is going to go away. They're going to keep acting the same way, and they might even give you an apology, but it's a superficial apology. It's an apology where nothing was actually dealt with, no difficult emotions were actually felt, nothing was actually changed. It's just a way of like not having to deal with that, right? And don't try to change this person. You're going to waste your time, and you're going to find that there is really nothing that you can do to save this type of personality, because they're never wrong, and it's always your fault. They will play the blame game to maintain their sense of self. So you have to have really airtight boundaries with these people. And you're going to, as always, want to observe your physiological and emotional reactions that you have to them in order to gauge how much distance you need. Because this cannot be a rational process. It must be an intuitive and kind of like physical process. By physical, I mean emotions are not a psychological event. They are a physical thing that happens in your body. So what this means is, don't try to convince yourself intellectually that, oh, you know, it's not that bad, or maybe I could try this or that. If physically you're ill, you know, your autoimmune diseases are acting up, your depression is back, you just can't seem to take steps towards your goals anymore, use your body in order to understand whether you need to go low contact, apply the gray rock method, where you just basically don't have any expectations of receiving the minimal amount of love or respect from that relationship. So you only tell the people the very minimal. You don't share any personal information. You know it'll all be used against you, and you don't expect actual love or support from those people. Or you have to also consider whether going no contact is the only thing that makes sense for you. As all pathological narcissists, covert narcissists, when they lose their punching bag, they might go crazy. They have no other ways of regulating their emotions. And they might become particularly abusive at these moments and intolerable for you and for your mental health. Okay, guys, I hope that this video was helpful. Let me know if it clarified anything for you. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Again, the Inner Mastery Lab is available if you want to know how to heal from childhood narcissistic abuse in adulthood. How do you actually create a sense of self when you were routinely massacred as a self, right? This is what the Inner Mastery Lab is all about. It's about creating psychological distance from your parents so you can break free from psychological entrapment, so you can actually call the shots in your own life. The cart will be open until March 30th. And if you're unsure about the program, just get in touch with me. And we can schedule a free 20-minute alignment call, pressure-free. I'm not going to be like, hey, give me your credit card. Come on, pay. I want you to participate if you feel called to this. And if you're not sure, let's talk for 20 minutes for free. And we'll see if it's a good fit. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. All right? So get in touch and we can get you in the program. And that's it, guys. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel. If you want more information, let me know in the comments. I can't answer all the comments, but it's supremely important to me to figure out how you guys are reacting to the content. I say in Portuguese because I started this business in Portuguese. Vocês são minha faculdade. You guys are my graduate degree. As I interact with you, I learn what it is that I should focus on, what I need to study, and how to become a better professional. So let's interact, and I can find better ways of helping you as well. All right, guys, that's it. Love y'all. Bye-bye.